be here. Just stand here. I'm just over here. Yeah. Does it work?
Because it's over the logo.
Oh, yeah, that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't need my name up there. Okay. Does it work? Can we start? Yeah, I'll wait. Good afternoon and welcome to a press conference on the launch of our briefing, the fossil fuel expansion in the United Arab Emirates, ADNOC and its international partners. This is a joint report by Urgewald, Leave It in the Ground Initiative, BankTrack and Reclaim Finance, and I'm very happy to introduce you to our panel. Katrin Ganswind, Head of Finance Research at Urgewald, and Fatima Issam Eldin, who's a research analyst at LINGO, Leave It in the Ground Initiative. And I'll pass it over to you right away, Katrin.
Thank you, Clara. So let's start. In a breathtaking conflict of interest, the CEO of the national oil company of an OPEC state is running this year's climate conference. And it looks a bit like Al Jaber invited all of his friends to join. COP28 is flooded by over 2,400 fossil fuel lobbyists, as we heard today, and the number has quadrupled since last year. It seems they want to make sure COP28 is not delivering on the well-needed fossil fuel phase-out commitment, but they want to ensure that oil and gas companies can keep running the planet havoc with their climate-wrecking business model. Al Jaber publicly declared that science does not tell us to phase out fossil fuels, and many NGOs have protested that claim already. But looking at the business model of his company ADNOC, his statement is unfortunately not surprising at all. ADNOC is set to accelerate its oil and gas production. According to science, therefore, ADNOC is not on track for keeping the 1.5-degree limit within reach. The IEA Net Zero Emissions Scenario 2050, published 2021, made clear that exploration for new oil and gas resources is not required. However, according to Urgewald's Global Oil and Gas Exit List, ADNOC is still spending, on average, $20 million per year to look for new fossil fuel resources in the United Arab Emirates and in Azerbaijan. According to the same IEA roadmap, no new oil and gas resources should be opened up from 2022. Quoting Fatih Birol, the head of the International Energy Agency, if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no investments in oil, gas, and coal from this year, as he said, 2021. Again, according to Urgewald's Global Oil and Gas Exit List, ADNOC wants to bring about 9 billion barrels of oil equivalent into production in the near future. More than 92% of ADNOC's oil and gas expansion plans are not compatible with the mentioned IEA scenario. ADNOC even has the highest production overshoot of any company in the world, so they are most far away from the IEA scenario than any other fossil company. Despite its expansion plans, ADNOC declares to become carbon neutral in 2045, and we wonder what is the magic trick ADNOC will use to make that happen, because carbon capture and storage will not do the job. According to the IEA, the history of CCS has largely been one of unmet expectations. As an example, just a few weeks ago, ADNOC announced the final investment decision on its Highland Gasher project. This project is declared to be the first net zero emission gas production site, which aims to capture 1.5 million tons of carbon per year. However, burning the gas ADNOC's project will produce would emit more than 20 times as much CO2 as ADNOC plans to store. This number shows how important it is for fossil fuel companies to take Scope 3 emissions into account and to report on them. Additionally, of course, methane will be emitted along the supply chain, and ADNOC conveniently leaves all these emissions out of its net zero equations. According to the joint NGO report, Banking on Climate Chaos, ADNOC received $14.1 billion of financing from 14 banks since the Paris Agreement. ADNOC's largest financiers were UK's HSBC, the Japanese MUFG and SMBC, and the US bank JP Morgan Chase. There's also recent financing from this year. There were 3 loan tranches of a total of 2.3 billion. And while the full data on this lending is not public yet, we can already say that the first tranche is financed by Bank of China, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, and the UK bank Standard Chartered. ADNOC also set up a new debt finance vehicle, ADNOC Morban. So far, there were first investor briefings on this finance vehicle, but more information isn't out yet. However, investors, of course, should not invest in ADNOC Morban, as this will fuel ADNOC's fossil fuel expansion course. And in general, as long as fossil fuel expansion isn't stopped by ADNOC and there's no phase-out plan published, companies like ADNOC should be considered uninsurable, unbankable, and uninvestable. In the United Arab Emirates, there are currently 17 oil and gas expansion projects, which could produce up to 12 billion barrels of oil equivalent in the near future. On the map, you can see the oil and gas fields where these extraction projects are situated. As you can see from the color code, at least 4 of these fields are untapped. Out of these 17 projects, 2 are solely owned by international companies. That is the project in onshore block 4 from Inpax Japan, and the onshore block 3 from Occidental Petroleum. Out of the other 15 projects, only 1 is solely owned by ADNOC. The other projects are all co-owned by international partners. In total, 19 international companies from 12 countries are co-owning these expansion projects. I want to highlight here just the top international partners. Eni, Inpex, Total, Exxon, CNPC, Wintershall, BP, OMV, and Lukoil. And I want to highlight here Eni because they have the highest prorated share in this new expansion projects. To say it detailed, in resources which are under development and field evaluation, which we consider in the global oil and gas exit list as short-term expansion projects, because they will come into production in the next years. Another highlight is Total, because the French Total Energies is invested in 9 projects, so the biggest number of projects of all international companies active in oil and gas expansion in the United Arab Emirates. Both of these European majors, Eni and Total, are internationally active and are also highly invested in oil and gas expansion on the African continent. To sum up this part, there is no fossil fuel future with ADNOC. Just like every other oil and gas producing company on this planet, ADNOC has no intention of transforming its business model or of even reducing its dependency on fossil fuels. The company instead gears towards massively expanding its fossil fuel extraction, its fossil fuel exports, and its petrochemical investments. While ADNOC's CEO Al Jaber is on the driver's seat of this year's climate summit, his company is on a clear collision course with a 1.5-degree limit. And now I want to pass it on to Fatima.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the Hail Gasha sour gas mega project that is one of ADNOC's expansions that are not compatible with the 1-point aligned world. It is an offshore project with an estimated lifetime emissions of 440 million tons of CO2 from its fossil gas. The reason why this project is especially disturbing is the fact that the gas field is partially under a UNESCO protected area. Before I get into the particularities of this project, let me start with the beginning of our research. About 3 years ago, we started to map protected areas to see which ones are vulnerable to disruption of the fossil fuel industry. We built a global map with all the protected areas and overlaid it with industry data, and what we found was shocking. We found that globally, there are over 900 legally protected areas covering more than 5 million square kilometers that have ongoing or planned fossil fuel extraction projects within their borders. Almost 60% of these are in the licensing or development phase, and over 10% of them are planned to start extracting within the next decade. The IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, called on governments to prohibit environmentally damaging infrastructure and industrial activities in all IUCN categories of protected areas in 2016. Yet, in a report with Earth Insight and the IUCN, which we published just 2 days ago, we could show over 2,000 oil, gas, and coal extraction projects in these areas, and their potential emissions would amount to a staggering 50.8 gigatons of CO2 emissions. That is more than the overall CO2 emissions of 2022 globally. In just 1 year, the number of fossil fuel assets in protected areas has grown. This just shows that the industry is running out of easily accessible resources and started to turn towards places which were off limits before. We decided to zoom into the UAE, the host of this year's climate negotiations, and what we found was distressing. The country has 8 protected areas with fossil fuel-related activities within their borders. 7 of them have active extractions, and 5 of the expansion projects are being developed connected to these protected areas. The combined fossil fuel reserve under the UAE's protected areas is close to 7 billion barrels of oil equivalent, and its potential emissions is about 12 times UAE's 2022 emissions. What we also found is that many companies are involved in extraction in protected areas in the country. The number one is obviously ADNOC, which owns about 30% of the reserves within protected areas. But we also have, among many others, the French TotalEnergies, the Italian Eni, the Korea National Oil Corporation, and the British BP. One of the UAE's protected areas that is threatened by current extraction, as well as new expansion, is the Marava Biosphere Reserve. The Marine Reserve lies just off the coast of Abu Dhabi, and it is the country's first UNESCO-recognized biosphere reserve. It is the UAE's largest marine protected area with an immensely rich ecosystem and has a variety of habitats such as seagrass, mangrove forests, and coral reefs. It is home to many IUCN red-listed species like the green turtle. One of its vulnerable species is the large marine mammal, the dugong or sea cow, that is known to be the origin of the myth of the mermaid. The second largest population of dugongs live in the Arabian Gulf, and this animal is also protected by law in the UAE. This just makes it more disturbing to see the biggest sour gas project getting the green light in such a delicate environment. The Gasha mega project is planned to start extraction in 2025, and part of the infrastructure, such as multiple artificial islands, has already been built, and many are on the way. But it is not too late to stop the project before the pipelines and the drilling. The impact of the project can be devastating for the dugongs and the whole habitat. Let me just list a few reasons why. Ultra-sour gas is known to be the most toxic fossil gas. It is proven to be toxic to fish in the case of leak, and leaks are not a negligible risk in any oil or gas projects. Habitat disturbance is especially harmful to dugongs, which are sensitive to noise, and the unavoidable sediment in the water can reduce the amount of seagrass that is its main food source. But we cannot be sure what is the impact, as the environmental impact assessment, the EIA, which is required for any development in protected areas, is not released publicly. The main shareholders of the project is ADNOC, and it has many international partners disturbing the habitat. Just to mention a few, the Italian Eni, the German Wintershall, the Austrian OMV, and others involved in the construction, for example, from Italy and South Korea. I believe it is more than clear that this habitat is directly threatened as a result of the global fossil fuel addiction. Protected areas are protected for a reason. They are important safety mechanisms during the climate emergency, as they conserve ecosystems which provide essential services for humans and other species. Ensuring the survival of these areas, we increase our chances to protect the climate we know to be suitable to support humankind. Our research showed that not only in the UAE, but globally, even the areas that we claim to be protected are not protected from the disruption of the fossil fuel industry. And the science is clear. We need to phase out all fossil fuels, coal, oil, and fossil gas included. We should start it now, as we should have started it yesterday. So why not start the phase out in the places that we have already decided are worth protecting? Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists, and the room is now open for questions. There's a question over there.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name is Dongjae from Solutions for Climate. We're a climate advocacy group based on Seoul, South Korea. I have some question to Catherine. So before I joined this COP, I heard some serious news around ADNOC that they're trying to deal to endorse Mozambique gas project with Chinese government, and while they're trying to acquire 10% of share of the project. So I have serious concern about this, as Korea is one of conglomerate Samsung's heavy industry arm is trying to build out production vessels and the LNG carriers for the project. So including this kind of LNG expansion plan of ADNOC, I wanted to ask Catherine how you're tracking ADNOC's list of LNG expansion plan, and also what kind of relevant concerns do you have around this expansion? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Dongjae. I think what is most important here to mention is that there is also expansion of LNG export in the United Arab Emirates, obviously of ADNOC. So close to Ruwais, which you saw also on the map, there's also going to be a similar called LNG project with 2 LNG export trains, each of them with a capacity of 4.8 million tons of hydrogen per year. And the current export capacity of the Emirates is around 6 million tons per annum. So this will more than double the export capacity of the United Arab Emirates, which fits to the Emirati strategy to boost gas production for internal support, so to support their own national energy production, but as well to establish themselves as a global hydrogen supplier.
Thank you. Any more questions? There's another question over there.
Thank you. Kurt Streif, IS Global and Boston College. Thank you for your very nice analysis. And I just want to add that if we talk about CCS or unabated fossil fuel solutions, we forget that there will still be fossil fuel combustion. And this results in air pollution, and air pollution is the single most important environmental risk factor to health. I'm a doctor, I'm a specialist in cancer, and we cannot improve the situation if we talk about CCS or unabated fossil fuel phase out. We need a full fossil fuel phase out now. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another question in the room? Yes.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Giacomo Di Capo from Paris Observatory. I had a couple of questions regarding both the presidency, so the impacts of this research also on the integrity that is perceived by the parties during this conference, and also on the role that climate litigation can have in the expansion of future oil and gas projects. So the first one is regarding the importance of the impartiality of the presidency historically in the conference of the parties. In light of this research, do you see a direct spillover in terms of the ability of this presidency to form consensus around a number of items, not to say the least also, of course, the question of fossil fuel phase out? And the second one regarding climate litigation. We have seen in Europe and in a number of different regions how public participation in climate litigation has been a useful instrument in the reduction of oil and gas expansion projects. How do you see this taking a place in areas or countries where public participation or SLAPs are increasing? Thank you.
Maybe starting with the second one, and just to say what I can, we are not we're lawyers, so I can only tell you what's maybe anyway public knowledge, that of course the less possibility for civil society to work, to be present, to thrive, the less ability there is for public pressure in general, and of course a national oil company owned by a petrostate is very unlikely to face any national litigation. Say it like that. I think for this COP presidency, we made very clear that we don't think that a head of an oil and gas company should lead a climate conference. There has been multiple protests when Al Jaber as president was announced. There have been interventions from EU parliamentarians, from US parliamentarians, from NGOs, and we can just say again that negotiators should be, in the best case, of course, neutral, but it's totally clear that somebody who is running an oil and gas company which business model will not be available anymore in a climate-friendly future will not work on a commitment to phase out fossil fuels or to find any consensus which would reach us to a commitment that would ensure the 1.5 degree limit is in reach.
We have time for one final question. Yes. Or do you also want to add to that? You still have time.
Thank you. So the UAE is aspiring to be a climate leader. Your presentation looks like it's maybe not there yet. What would be your, and there seems to be a long way to go there. What would be your recommendations for immediate next steps that the country can take to actually start moving into that role?
Thank you for the question. I think it's very clear that new expansions and new investment in fossil fuel is not something that we should continue. So that's the first thing, no new investment in any fossil fuel projects. And then what is really needed after that is the transition. I don't know how many of you knows, but the electricity that runs this conference is not the cleanest. So the UAE itself has a lot of work to actually get there to power its own electricity with renewable energies. So if it has money to invest in new projects, then it should have money to invest in renewables. So I guess this is the first step, and maybe to make sure, I guess I just lost the thought of strain.
Maybe I can add to that. So yes, we have to stop the expansion. Yeah. We have to start the transition. We obviously should start in the protected areas we need so desperately. And what companies like ADNOC need to do, they actually totally need to reinvent themselves. This business model is 100 years old, but if it goes on another 100 years, this part of the world and many other parts of the world will be unlivable. They will be too hot to be here. So, yes, ADNOC has to reinvent itself, starting with not expanding, starting with phasing out production, and starting to run full throttle into renewables. And if you're still interested in more information, we are here after, and our media officer has a few of these copies of the briefing with him. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us here today, and we'll make sure to meet us outside.